In the United States, a civil war is gripping the country. Texas and California seceded and formed the WF or Western Force Militia, while Florida formed its own confederacy. Third term, the president leads government forces against separatist movements, and he often appears on television to give speeches, vowing that victory is near thanks to the protection of the separatists. Loyal nation, but no one believed it, and it was only a matter of time before WF arrived in Washington, D.C. War photographer Lee watched the speech from her hotel room in New York and even took pictures for television. That's when she noticed a bombing in the middle of the city. The next day, Lee and journalist Joel go downtown by car to cover a protest where desperate people are asking for water. They were given fluorescent vests before Lee joined the crowd to take a few photos. Things quickly turned violent as police tried to push people back, only for the crowd to fight back. This doesn't scare Lee, who continues taking pictures, but a young photographer named Jesse is affected by the chaos. Lee immediately took Jesse to safety and learned that this girl was a big fan of his work. As she gave Jesse her vest, she noticed an armed woman holding an American flag run into the crowd and pushed Jesse for cover just before a bomb exploded, killing almost all of the protesters. For several minutes, Jesse heard nothing and was faced with shock, but Lee quickly went out to take pictures of all the bodies. Jesse also forced herself to take pictures because she didn't want to be seen as incompetent. Later, at a hotel where all the journalists are staying, Lee and Joel discuss their options with their mentor Sammy, while Lee tries to upload his photos despite the slow Wi-Fi. There were rumors of a major attack on the 4th of July that would make this historically relevant, but they weren't sure if they believed it or not. At that moment, the power went out, which happened frequently since the start of the war, and that's why the hotel had generators on hand. After some encouragement, Sammy learns that the duo will be traveling through war zones of the country to get to DC, but not to support the front lines. They want one last interview with the president, who hasn't given an interview in 14 months. In fact, journalists will be shot if they get close to the White House. Sammy thinks their plan is crazy and even knows what the best route to DC is, so Lee guesses he wants to go to DC too. However, Sammy wanted to go to the front in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he needed a driver. At first, Lee and Joel were worried because Sammy was too old to run, but Lee eventually agreed to take the boy. Lee then tried to go to his room on the 10th floor, and the receptionist reminded him that power came and went, so using the elevator could be risky. At this time, she was approached by Jesse, who came to thank her and return the vest. Lee tells her to keep it and buy a helmet for the future. Jesse explains that she was a regular photographer until now and is trying to become a war photographer. This is why Lee is his hero. Later in her room, Lee takes a shower to try to relax, but she is haunted by all the atrocities she witnessed during the many wars she wrote about. There was so much death, destruction, and horrific torture, and Lee photographed it all without being able to help those in need. The next morning, the group prepares to leave and Lee is shocked to see Jesse in the car. She argues with Joel, who denounces Lee's hypocrisy on many points. She agrees with Sammy, who doesn't know how to introduce himself, and all journalists start at that age, including Lee himself even. Without any argument, Lee agrees to take Jesse away, but only if they drop her off at Charlottesville with Sammy. The group departs, and as they leave town, Sammy reminds Jesse to be careful. The roads were filled with abandoned or broken down cars, so they had to go around them. At checkpoints, soldiers must check press ID cards before letting them through. During the trip, Sammy and Joel discuss the types of questions Joel might ask in an interview, such as broaching the subject of disbanding the FBI and using airstrikes against American citizens. Finally, they find a gas station guarded by 3 armed men. They really need fuel, so maybe they'll stop. At first, the men didn't want to share, but they quickly changed their minds when Lee offered to pay more in Canadian currency. While they were filling the tank, Jesse noticed something in the distance and went to check while one of the men followed her. Lee was worried and also followed them. Jesse is horrified when she discovers 2 men hanged after being brutally tortured. The shooter explained that they were looters and that his group had been arguing for days about what to do with them, since they were still alive. He gives Jesse the choice, but she freezes. To distract the guy, Lee makes him pose with the looters and take a few pictures. Later, when the group sets out again, Jesse complains about not getting a single picture and wonders if she should help. Others explained that it was the life of a journalist, so she had to get used to it because together with one guy stuck in the middle. One team threw smoke grenades to create cover, But as soon as the guy tried to run away, he was shot and cameras recorded him bleeding. His teammates got him to safety and did their best to treat his wounds. Unfortunately, the man couldn't stop the bleeding and died while Jesse took photos of the entire process. The group then entered the building, and the journalists followed them. They found a bleeding man asking for help and he was shot. Jesse couldn't help but watch as the team finished searching the building. In the end, Joel smiled at a warrior as if it were a normal workday. The soldiers captured a few enemies and took them to execution, which Jesse also took pictures of. Some time later, the journalists arrived at a refugee camp. All the tents were full, so they still had to sleep in the car while Jesse handled the photo the old-fashioned way. She continued to bond with Lee, who explained that his parents were also out of the farm acts as if nothing is certain. When Jesse finally looks at her photos, she is disappointed that they don't look good. But Lee reminds her that this is normal. Only 1 out of 30 photos has value. Jesse finally finds a great photo of the dying man and Lee praises her work. That night, the group can relax with the other refugees, before returning to the horrors of the morning. Their journey continues as journalists observe constant death and destruction along the way. Jesse took more photos, putting friends' faces in the photos to add to the impact. Finally, they arrived at a town that seemed completely normal, with people walking in the streets and peace all around. They stopped at a clothing store and asked the clerk what was going on. The seller explains that her town has chosen to ignore the war. Jesse convinces Lee to try on dresses, pointing out that war doesn't mean she can't have beautiful things. She teased his appearance and took a photo of Lee's smile because it was the first time she saw it. Lee then returns to Sammy, who points out that there are armed men on the roof. He also says that this life would not suit them because it is boring. Sometime later, the group finds an abandoned circus with a dead man in the middle of the road. Lee checks the area using the camera's zoom feature but sees no one. Joel decides to move forward, but as soon as they pass through the entrance, their window is shot into. In panic, Joel sped past the bodies until they found a safe place near a truck to stop. There, they found 2 camouflaged soldiers waiting for the shooter in the house to reveal himself. As the journalists moved to cover the incident, the shooter fired at them and missed. Jesse and Lee took pictures while Joel tried to interrogate the soldiers, wanting to know which side they and the shooter were on. However, the soldiers were not on any team. They were just 2 guys trying to kill someone who wanted to kill them back. After a long wait, the soldiers finally killed the shooter and the group was able to leave safely. Moments later, the journalists noticed a car speeding up to catch up with them. Fearing the worst, Lee slowed down to let them pass. However, the car drives alongside them and a guy screams at them, scaring them. Luckily, it was just a joke and these people were Tony and Bohai, fellow journalists and friends of Joel. Turns out that during the night at the hotel, Joel got drunk and told Tony where they were going. Tony also reveals that Joel hit Jesse. He was so excited to see them that he climbed out the window and got in the car with them, saying they were happier. Jesse is impressed and tries the same trick, but ends up getting in the other car. Bohai likes her more than Tony and speeds away with Jesse. Lee was still worried even though Tony said Bohai was trustworthy, and she became even more worried when they could no longer see the other car in front of them. Suddenly, a military vehicle passed by, and Lee had to drive out of the road to avoid a collision. Luckily, she stopped the car just before they hit a tree. They quickly returned to the road and found Bohai's car abandoned by a farm with the door open. The group goes to investigate and discovers that Bohai and Jesse have been captured by loyalist gunmen, who forced them to kneel while dropping their bodies into a large grave. Sammy points out that these people are no ordinary soldiers because they're clearly doing this secretly, but Joel thinks their ID cards can keep them safe. In anywhere, Lee, Joel, and Tony approached the gunmen and explained that Bohai and Jesse were part of their group of reporters, swearing that they were only in Charlottesville to cover a story about the reopening of a university. Without hesitation, the main shooter shot Bohai, shocking Jesse and making Tony cry. The shooter asks where they come from, so Lee, Joel, and Jesse mention their origins. However, when Tony explains that he is from Hong Kong, he is also shot. When everyone was panicking, Sammy appeared in the car and used it to hit the soldiers, causing them to fall in the grave. Jesse also accidentally fell and had to climb over a giant pile of corpses to escape. Joel helps him and the group get back in the car to leave, ignoring the remaining gunmen trying to shoot them as they escape. On the way, Jesse and Joel became depressed, and Jesse even vomited. They only went a mile or two before Sammy announced that he could no longer drive, and the group discovered he had been shot. They put him in the back seat, and Joel took the wheel, driving as fast as possible through a burning forest. They finally reached the WF military base in Charlottesville, where they had a flag with only 2 stars. Unfortunately, it was too late. Sammy was dead. While Joel screamed into the wind, the soldiers carried Sammy's body away in a box. Lee looked at the photo she took of Sammy dead and just deleted it. A while later, they learned from journalist friends that most of the loyalists had surrendered, so DC was invincible except for a few remaining soldiers. The president's death is imminent, which means the team cannot interview him. Joel is extremely upset because this means Sammy died in vain. Lee and Jesse take a moment to grieve together, and Jesse admits that the past few days have been the most scaring of her life, but also the scariest. Later, while Lee cleans Sammy's blood off the car, the trio agree to leave with WF so they can cover up the attack on the White House. Most loyalists may have surrendered, but enough remained to continue the fighting in the streets. When WF attacked the Lincoln Memorial, reporters followed the soldiers throughout the area. Jesse took many powerful photos, but Lee was stunned when she was attacked by PTSD. Joel takes her out as a tank and a helicopter clear the way, allowing them to continue moving. Soldiers went up to different rooftops to set up defense lines, and journalists hid behind an armored car to follow the story. Suddenly, an explosion caused the armored vehicle to flee, so the group had to run for cover. Jesse slowed down as she continued taking photos, including a photo of a man on fire. She also got some great photos of a tank that finally broke through the wall surrounding the White House. Lee was still struggling and even crying, so Joel had to encourage her. Nearby, another journalist and her cameraman recorded the entire incident. At that point, they noticed Secret Service agents removing the president from the White House and putting him in a car. 3 cars left the area, and as soon as they hit the road, soldiers surrounded them to shoot each person inside. Jesse took more photos, however. Lee guessed it was just a decoy and dragged his friends to the White House to find the real president. Some soldiers noticed and followed them. Inside the White House, they found a few bodies and not much else. Soldiers quickly arrived and began an extensive search, which resulted in them finding an agent arriving in the conference room. Lee, more wary, takes pictures with Jesse, while the agent explains that she wants to negotiate the president's surrender, asking to take him to a neutral country. However, the soldiers shot him and continued into the White House. Other agents opened fire in the hallway, and journalists tried their best to continue photographing each death. They moved through many rooms, mercilessly shooting one loyalist after another. When they reached the back area, Jesse ventures to stand in the middle of the hallway to take pictures, and Lee jumps in front of her as the enemy prepares to open fire. Jesse fell to the ground and did not hesitate to take a photo of Lee being shot right in front of her. Jesse then stood frozen for a few seconds until Joel asked her to come to the Oval Office. The soldiers surrounded the president, but before they could shoot, Joel asked them to wait because he needed a quote. The president says, "Don't let them kill me," and Joel decides enough is enough. Now the soldiers have finally taken down the president, winning the war. Jesse's final photo shows the soldiers posing next to the body as if it were a hunting shot. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.